Morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the WACO meeting, our first of the year. And we understand that some of our minor speakers are still on the road trying to get here. I guess it's a combination of rain and traffic, so we may be taking some of the efforts out of sequence, but that's okay. We're flexible here, and we'll accomplish our goal today. The first thing I'd like to do is the Pledge of Allegiance, and Susan Hinman is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Susan? Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, announcements. Any new visitors to the WACO meeting, or someone that hasn't been here for a while? I'd like to call upon Jose.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce Mark Monin, the newly appointed Director of the Toro Water District. Mark will be filling the chair left by Ted Martin, who passed away in November.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very interested in learning all the great things and topics, so I'd love to introduce myself to you at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Any other announcements, upcoming events? Okay, must be all quiet on the waterfront. Next is the MWD report. Linda?
Good morning. Not a lot. I don't have a lot to report today because our last meeting here at WACO occurred after the board meeting at Metropolitan, and we don't have another board meeting until next week. I'll just pick a few little subjects and just enlighten you a little bit. As you probably know, our current allocation from the State Water Project is at 10%. Even with the storms that we've had, we expect probably a modest, maybe another 5% will be added to that. Our water demands in 2014 were a little over 2 million acre feet of water, and the supplies were just a little over, well, not quite a million, 0.1 maybe, not quite that. So we ended up with, for the year, 1.1 million acre feet of dry year storage, and that is down from the storage in 2013, which the dry year storage last year, or in 2014, was 2.4 million acre feet, so we obviously had to pull water out of storage. Predictions are that we may receive more rain this season, but the temperatures are also predicted to remain a little bit higher. So there will be less dense snowpack in the Sierras, but we will have more water. You may remember at the last WACO meeting I talked about the water that we've lost in the past because of the way reclamation runs the pumps when we have water coming down after a storm. It's kind of difficult because we have those plumes, those turbidity plumes that come down with that first flush. In mid-December, the State Water Project pumps were pumping at our capacity, our allocation capacity. There was debris in the Central Valley Project pumps area, and they weren't pumping at such a high flow. However, the turbidity is moving down, and they don't like for that to get into the South Delta because it causes us to lose our pumping capacity. Operationally, they were able to keep this this turbidity from coming down. However, when we had the most recent windstorms, they had those up north as well, and that helped push that turbidity down the river towards the South Delta. So this week we picked up 4 Delta smelt in the pumps. and that's not a good sign, and that's when they start to cut back our pumping capabilities. So had it not been for the storm, we would be in a little bit better position. The other issue as well, and this is interesting with storm flow, when these storms come through, it sometimes triggers the migration of the salmon, which is also something that DWR and Reclamation looks at. So it's very tricky getting our water. A little update on the BDCP. In December, DWR announced that there will be additional changes to the proposed BDCP facility. These changes are designed to further diminish the negative impacts to the Delta communities and to reduce such things as disturbance to the greater sandhill cranes. Not sure what they are, but they will then be designed to improve the long-term reliability and the functionality of the proposed tunnels. These proposed changes came about after consideration of feedback during the last public comment period. They'll be included in the recirculated BDCP and the environmental documents, and we will once again have another public review comment time. And this should occur in the spring of the year, and hopefully we'll move on from there. We will have a board action this month, which I'm sure will gin up a bit of discussion at the Communications and Legislation Committee meeting this month. Staff is asking for board action to put out an RFP that will authorize a new water conservation advertising campaign for 2015 with a budget not to exceed $5.5 million. After the board approves the action, the staff will come back with a consultant recommendation. We've had spirited conversations at our last two meetings regarding conservation and how well we are or are not doing at conveying the message of our need for conveying that message to the public. So I expect much discussion about what the board will expect from this new expenditure as our current campaign winds down and we prepare for the next consultant. And now for that infamous water fact, and I told you they're getting harder and harder to find. Did you know, and I'm sure a lot of you did, where's Pierre? Is he here? I'm sure he knows. There you are. It requires 2,600 to 5,200 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. That 1 pound of beef provides about 36 grams of protein. Scientists are now looking at a replacement for beef, or several replacements. They have found one that provides 64 grams of protein, as well as all 9 essential amino acids, and nearly 5 times as much magnesium as beef. It can be consumed whole, or it can be processed and used as sort of a type of flour. It eats anything, and this is the important fact. It consumes very little water to grow and survive. 80% of the world's population eat it, or something very similar. And this is for real, they're actually studying this. It's crickets. So look for it in your local Whole Foods market.
Okay, Pierre Swan, Aqua. Report.
Okay, thank you. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the Executive Director and staff, we'd like to wish everyone the best of New Year's. Last year was an exciting year. We succeeded as an industry in passing the water bond after how many years? 2009. We got monumental groundwater legislation that didn't leave everyone happy, but it was a step in the right direction from our point of view. We've been doing that for a long time down here. Coming up on the agenda in February is the Washington, D.C. conference, the 25th and 26th. If you have not gone to one of these, it is a very worthwhile thing to go back and see how government works or doesn't. And you get to meet people and from other districts, and there's a lot of camaraderie and exchange of data and information. So it is a really good thing. They're staying at a new hotel this year. But please look at the flyer. It's coming out to everyone. It should be coming out to all the districts, and consider going to that. And I thought Linda was talking about Soylent Green, and I thought I would rather have that than crickets. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Our next speaker or update is going to be from Harvey De La Torre from MODOC on the utmost current information on the water supply. Harvey?
Good morning. I'm going to be giving a presentation just on a water supply report. We do this for our board just about during the kind of the winter period, when it rains. But obviously, this is kind of a little bit more a cornerstone report simply because it's not only just the first manual survey numbers that from the state side that kind of dictate exactly what the water year we're going to have, but in addition, we just kind of ended a pretty interesting year on the water supply side. So I'm going to go through this. Please go ahead and stop me if there's any questions you have along the way. There's obviously a lot of questions that I may not have answers to, predicting exactly what the next couple of months are going to be, but we're going to highlight a little bit about what happened in 2014, talk a little bit about where our current supply conditions are just on some of the preliminary months, and then provide just slightly a little bit of a forecast for 2015 and see how things end. Whether upon Metropolitan would simply trigger its allocations or not is going to be dictated a lot upon what supplies we expect to see in these couple of months. Wanted to highlight just a little bit about precipitation simply in the in the local area, but just more importantly illustrate this chart here just kind of highlights exactly the amount of precipitation we've received since all the way 2000. And you can see the average amounts are probably around 14 inches for the local area. But what's significant is these last three years have been below the average amount. And when we talk about, or when we tell key people that one storm doesn't really make up of it, you can kind of reference these numbers here, that the last 3 years have created a deficit below the average of around 21 inches. So one can argue that you have to have at least 21 inches just to make up to the average of the last 3 years to kind of get you in that surplus condition phase. So although we've had thus far in 2014-15, you see this last number right here, around 1 inch slightly above for last year, we're still far away from meeting that average, and we have to even make up the deficit from the last 3 years. I think the LA Times kind of reported that the last 3 years were some of the driest years, and I think over like 1,000 years. It's important to know that this drought has been happening for a number of years, and we're simply trying to get out of the hole and then see if we can actually build some storage along the way. So this is kind of an interesting table just to kind of illustrate what the precipitation has been locally. Not only has it been dry, but it's also been very, very hot. And it's important to note that here in the temperatures in 2014 have been hotter than the average in the months of January, May, September, and October. Orange County has had 2.4 degrees above the 15-year average index that we measure usually at John Wayne Airport. And you can kind of see that last time, was one of the hottest months we've had in a number of years. And just average overall, the temperature has been slightly above average and above normal. And that has a significant impact in exactly the demand levels. And this is just a comparison between the 2013 and 14 temperatures. What does that do for Southern California? Well, for Southern California, that plays a big part in exactly the amount of supplies we receive. And this table right here illustrates that on the State Water Project side alone, just the core supplies we received, we only received 100,000 acre feet. Normally, we would receive close to around 1.2 million acre feet. So you can see the significance. And that was a result of a 5% State Water Project allocation that DWR provided in 2014. The other core supplies the Metropolitan receives, or Southern California receives, is the Colorado River. And on the core supply side there, we receive close to 834,000 acre feet. Demands totaled in Southern California on the imported side, 2.1 million acre feet. So therefore, there was a need to draw from storage of around 1.2 million acre feet, close to that range. That's a significant draw on exactly the amount of water we put in. And historically, we've always put water into storage. But in this year, we took a significant amount out. And you can see that obviously the greatest deficit was obviously on the state water project side. Here's what that impact kind of resulted in when it came to Metropolitan's dry year storage conditions. It was putting water into storage. We had a record high in 2012 of a total of around 2.7 million acre feet of dry year storage, and what I mean by that is simply storage that is utilized during drought conditions. It does exclude the emergency storage that Metropolitan has of close to around 600,000 acre feet. We took, like I said, close to 1.2 million acre feet out of storage. That's going to end the 2014 year of having a dry year storage around 1.1. So one could argue that we've taken just about half of all of our storage in one given year. And that just showed you the impact that 2013 and 14 has had on Southern California's supplies. The local precipitation, we kind of touched upon it, but this is again just a more larger scale of exactly what we have. Thus far, we should be at around 4 inches. We have an inch above that, or around 5 inches, and that's simply because of what we've gotten in December. And that's good. You can kind of see when we had a very significant wet year in that 2010-11 time frame, we had over 15 inches at this point. And we're just only a couple of months into the water year. When we look at the comparison upon the dry year we had last year, we're obviously doing better. We started off with that significant amount of rainfall we had in December, and that's putting us a little bit above the historical average, like I said, around an inch. And if we need to trend above that to around that 14-inch mark, we still have a little bit of ways to go. I don't think we're going to be reaching that El Nino year, as I mentioned, in 2010-11. You can see that around this time when we had that El Nino year, we were already at 15 inches, and we're only at 5 right now. So it looks like we're probably trending along that historical average. We don't look like we're probably going to have that significant El Nino year, but we are doing better than the dry year we had last year. You can just see with the forecasting, we kind of estimate what it could possibly be. The very, very high percentage is going to be more on the normal condition sides, and like I said, it's probably going to be better than the dry conditions that we've had last year. On the Sierra snowfall, they did the manual survey. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But what what we have on the the 8-station index, it shows it's still slightly above. The December provided a 7-inch surplus there, and we're showing around 120% of normal at this point. But it has been dry in the last couple of weeks, so we'll see if that trend can hopefully improve. What that has done is slightly improved the elevations in some of our key reservoirs that we receive. Lake Oroville had a slight increase. I believe it ranged from around 58 or 59 to 65. So some of the rainfall did hit exactly in Oroville, and that improved those conditions there. But they're still below the average, as you see here. San Luis improved a little bit more. I think they were around 40% going into this water year, and they've improved up to 61% of normal. So the rains have improved them, but they're still far away from reaching that normal point that we like to be at. On the Colorado River side, things have been somewhat a little bit better picture, and meaning the fact that they have been reaching their average conditions, and they've been pretty roughly beneficial for the last couple of years, even though they still has not had dramatic improvements in Lake Powell and Lake Mead, but they are hitting upon the average, and you can see that right now they're 103% of average. You still have to see some improvements to keep up to that average in that peak period in that April time frame. And then it just kind of shows you the elevation. Now, last year, there was issues associated with deliveries from Lake Powell into Lake Mead, meaning that they had to curtail some deliveries into Lake Mead. That has improved slightly simply because the Colorado Basin has improved, and now Lake Powell's planning to release close to 9 million acre feet into Lake Mead, and that's going to hopefully move them out of that trigger point for future years. If I showed you a chart from last year, you would see that we were projecting them to kind of be in that shortage trigger point, which would create curtailments for both some of the lower basin states. But that has improved slightly because, again, they're going to put more water from Lake Powell into Lake Mead. And this kind of shows you just an overall picture of where the elevation levels are with certain the key reservoirs, Lake Shasta, which is mainly on the federal contractor side of 42%, but Lake Oroville, like I said, is only at 40% of capacity. And then you're seeing San Luis 43, Diamond Valley, which is our local, at 50%, and Lake Mead and Lake Powell at that 40. Still below the average conditions, but slightly improving. Last year, like I said, the State Water Project started off at 10. It went down to 5. What we've seen in 2015, DWR announced a very conservative amount of 10%. They're going to do a further analysis to see exactly whether that will increase based on the snowpack. But indications from Mark Cowan, the director of the Department of Water Resources, still estimates to take a very conservative approach. And there's rumors that if it is going to see an increase, it's going to be a very modest increase, anywhere between 15 to maybe 20% if we're lucky. So again, you're moving into that water year, but we're not seeing significant increases in the State Water Project compared to the previous years, as you can see in 2011 and 12, where we're kind of reaching above that 50% range that we would like to see going in the water year. And just to show us an illustration of what that manual survey, the first manual survey that they took last year, as the first picture shown here, and compared to this year. And again, we've had some improvements, obviously, with some of the storms in December, but the impact that we've had in the last couple of years has not dramatically improved our conditions. They've improved it, but not to a point where we can kind of see and give us the relief that we need to go into this year. So what is the outlook for the next couple of months? Well, the national survey kind of looks at the two components of temperature and rainfall, and it's interesting that they're indicating that the temperature is still going to have a great chance of being above average, as well as having above average chance of rain. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't look like it's going to possibly see a potential increase in precipitation, but the temperature is still going to be high. So that means that there's not going to be that much of a snowpack. And from a water planner standpoint, you really want that snowpack because it holds that water and actually trickles it down when it's needed. By having that water warm, it's basically meaning that the water has a greater chance of simply run off and drawing into the Bay Delta, and simply having a greater chance of simply going into the ocean instead of going into our key reservoirs. So this is not the ideal situation. Obviously, we like the precipitation, but the temperature actually has a big part in keeping that water where it needs to be at to kind of fill our reservoirs. The National Survey also continues to state that we are continuing to be in a drought along the west, and I kind of think that ties with some of the temperatures and some of the conditions that they're forecasting for us here. But they do indicate that there's a slight improvement from last year, and I guess we'll take that news as progress, but still it's not getting us out of the woods. So the question that everyone asks me all the time is, well, does these conditions indicate whether or not we'll be going into allocations, meaning will Metropolitan trigger its allocation plan and limiting the amount of supplies that we'd provide? Well, under normal conditions, we're receiving close to a 50% state water project that would give us hopefully a 1 million acre feet of water, receiving another hopefully 1 million acre feet of water from the Colorado River. We would probably meet normal demands of around 2 million acre feet, as illustrated in the first bar chart here. If we had 40% of an allocation from the state, the board would probably likely, and staff would probably recommend, to pull modestly from their storage accounts of around 200,000 acre feet, and we could probably avoid implementing any allocations. Under the dry year scenario, on the last bar there, where we end up with 20% state water project allocation, there would be a gap, a supply gap of around 600,000 acre feet. The board would have to consider how much they would need to take out of storage, and as well as how much would they need to trigger an allocation. And that, in essence, has an impact upon all of us, exactly to a retail standpoint, upon whether we would allocate water in the county area here. So you can see that the dry year conditions obviously continue to put a lot of pressure on exactly where we're going to be headed. We still have a couple of months to see exactly where we're headed, but if we don't see significant progress on the state water project side, then there is still a likelihood of us triggering allocations and seeking further curtailment on our overall demands. So with that news, and hopefully with the picture of the rain, that we'll get something there. Happy to answer any questions.
Very good, Harvey. Well, we're getting a flavor for what we might encounter next year, and that certainly will be in as we go into the rainfall season. I'm wondering if they analyzed it in such a way where we say, well, what is the probability of a 40%? What is the probability of 20? And what's the probability of it being even drier? Or so it's some kind of a curve,
Right.
so that you get a feel for, we can survive 1 year, we could survive 2 years. At what point does this term allocation get serious?
Well, I think we've survived 3 years thus far. I think our storage has proven that. I think the other fact that we can point to is that we are probably avoiding last year, meaning that that we do have supplies. The conditions are showing that we are better off this time than last year. But what I can tell you, statistics and analysis, and tell you the probability, but I can't tell you what Mother Nature is going to give us over the next couple of months. And I don't want to be providing information that might be optimistic or might be pessimistic to you all. I think the most important thing that we can come away with is the fact that we got to continue to promote our message that conservation is not simply something that we do periodically, that we got to consistently do that, because every acre foot we can save is a continuation of acre foot put into storage. And I'll just tell you that if we did not do what we've done in the last couple of years, we wouldn't have had that storage of close to 3 million acre feet to put away, and we wouldn't have survived the last 3 years. We would have been talking about allocations and talking about implementing second or third year allocations. So I think that's the facts I can tell you right now, and we'll continue to tell you exactly what Mother Nature gets us, but I think we need to continue to plan and be progressive in our resource developments and our efforts to ensure that we try to put as much water in storage as we can.
Very good. Well, thanks a lot, Harvey.
We're going to have a brief update on legislative and social media issues. Heather Bias.
Morning, I'm Heather Baez from MODOC, and I'll give you just a real quick update on the legislative side. This past Monday was the first day of the legislative session in Sacramento. The governor was sworn into his historic fourth term and followed that with his annual State of the State address. He highlighted the state's investments in long overdue water projects and noted that we are confronting the drought and some longer term water issues, so that was a nice shout out for our industry. Overall, we're in pretty good shape fiscally. Soon we're going to make our last payment of $15 billion on borrowing made to cover deficits that date back to 2002. And the state will be repaying $1 billion that's owed to K through 12 education and community colleges, and repay $533 million that's owed to local governments. The main highlights during his address were education, pension and retiree health care costs, prisons, and the environment. And the environment was kind of the biggie. It was towards the end of his speech. He praised the legislature for passing and then now implementing AB 32, and said that we are on track to meet our 2020 goal of 1/3 of all of our electricity come from a renewable source. And then he encouraged the legislature to set goals beyond 2020 and set objectives for 2030 and beyond. And he said that he has 3 ambitious goals, and let me tell you, they are ambitious. He proposed an increase from 1/3 to 50% of use of all renewable energy. He wants us to reduce today's petroleum use in cars and trucks by up to 50%, and he wants to double the efficiency of existing buildings to make heating fuels cleaner. Today at 10 o'clock, the governor will release his budget. There will be existing bond and Prop 1 funds contained in that budget, and so I will probably be spending the rest of my day looking that over. There will be a water bond implementation informational hearing held at the Capitol. It's most likely going to be on January 27th. That date has not been confirmed, and there is no agenda as of yet, but the discussion will likely be focused on program guidelines and administration. All of us probably will have an opportunity to monitor and comment on those draft guidelines. Switching gears a little bit to the legislature, like I said, they were back in session on Monday. Just this week alone, they managed to introduce 163 bills, 96 assembly bills, and 67 Senate bills. I'll highlight some of those that I want to put on your radar probably next month. But I do want to point out a couple dates. January 30th, if your district has a bill idea and you would like to get that into draft formation, that needs to get into Legislative Council by January 30th. That is the last date to get ideas to Legislative Council. And then February 27th is the last day to introduce legislation. Committee hearings will start in March, but will most likely begin in earnest after the legislature reconvenes from spring recess on April 6th. So last but not least, how many of you out there have a smartphone? Smartphone, anyone? All right, okay. So, and then how many of you are on Facebook? Come on. Yeah, okay. So WACO, believe it or not, I'm going to blow your mind here. WACO has a Facebook page, but we have 94 fans. 94. And we actually do a really good job updating our Facebook page. Crystal updates it regularly. I update it. And we put, we give you a little hint about who our next month's speakers is going to be. If the meeting has to be moved because of an aqua conference or something like that, we put it on there. And the information is there. And then this lovely gentleman in the back is filming our meetings every month, and those are also linked onto our Facebook page. So go to Facebook right now and type in Water Advisory Committee, Orange County, and like our Facebook page. We posted a reminder of this meeting. Do you know how many people saw it? You want to take a guess? 7. 7 people saw it. So let's do a little bit better next month. So go to our Facebook page. We also have a YouTube channel. If you're interested in watching any of these other presentations, they're all linked there, and there's always going to be great information. So, oh, yes. Pierre.
The WACO meeting advertisement has appeared off both the MODOC and the OCWD web pages. It might be a good idea, even though we have a Facebook page, get that up there. I had to go on Facebook to find out what was going on.
Okay, I actually just checked the ISDOC one this week, and I know that one's there, so I'll just double check WACO. Okay, yeah, it's on the MODOC page for sure, but I will double check. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, the next part is our program. You probably noticed we called it Two Elephants in the Room, and we thought, well, that's a good way maybe to get your attention, wondering what we mean by that. And the planning committee, in putting this together, we were thinking, there's more than hydrology that's driving the problems that we're facing in terms of water supply. There's also political issues, even more regulatory issues outside of the State Water Project, and other types of activities that is going to have an impact on water supplies in the coastal area, including Orange County. So we have two presenters today. One is to talk about the trying to solve the Salton Sea problem. And not sure of what is involved in that, but there's been discussions in the past there could be fresh water going into Salton Sea as maybe one of the alternatives to try and take care of the salinity problem, which might place some competition for that water going someplace else. And secondly, LA Water and Power's Owens Valley and Mono Lake supply, which has been reduced over the last 20 years because of regulatory and environmental issues. So all these peripheral things to the MWD supply and supplies available to us needs to be understood as part of understanding what our longer term picture might look like. I'm certain there's other elephants out there that we will identify in the future that likewise would be of concern to this group. we're very appreciative of having a representative from the Salton Sea Authority. And the Salton Sea Authority is a joint powers arrangement between Imperial County, Riverside County, Coachella Valley Water District, and Imperial Irrigation District, and also one Indian tribe. And we're fortunate, very fortunate, to have the general manager. He has literally decades of experience in water resource issues, and prior to becoming the general manager of the authority, he was a partner in a civil engineering firm in Riverside County. And so at this time I'd like to introduce Roger Shintaku, and he's again the general manager, and we're going to find out what this elephant looks like. Roger?
Good morning and Happy New Year. I'd like to dispel one rumor, and that is we are not actively looking for fresh water to put in the Salton Sea. Okay. We are forbidden to do this stuff. But let me go through this very quickly here. As Don was saying, we're a JPA. We have the two overlying counties that overlie the Salton Sea. Imperial Irrigation District and Coachella Valley Water District are the two water districts that are the main purveyors for the residents around the sea. The Torres Martinez tribe was invited in as a part of the JPA because they own a substantial portion of the property under the wetted perimeter of the north end of the sea. One notably absent entity, if you look at the Salton Sea Authority, is the Bureau of Reclamation, or BLM. The federal government owns about 40% of the property underneath the Salton Sea, and although we've invited them to join the JPA, the most we've been able to accomplish was to get a MOU with them and that was a couple of years ago, to get them to participate with us on the planning for improving conditions in and around the sea. The authority is charged with managing salinity, maintaining the fish and wildlife habitat, trying to preserve the shoreline, encourage economic development, and continue to use the sea as an agricultural water sump. So what we're faced with at the authority is trying to keep a viable ecosystem. It's a very important stop along the Pacific Flyway, and it's a major stopping point for over 400 species of birds. Everyone recognizes this on the environmental side as being a very critical location. On the air quality side, there's not going to be really too much dust generated by the sea, but as the sea recedes, what you'll see is shallow exposed areas that everyone generically calls the playa, which will be emissive in terms of ppm 10s and ppm 2.5s. So we're looking at how to resolve those issues. And again, funding is a very critical part for what we're trying to do right now. I'll be discussing these things a little bit later. The longer term issue is water supply. And we are not actively looking for good water. We are looking for, if anything, copious quantities of brine to introduce into the sea from desalination projects. And the reason for that is that the brine typically comes out at 7,000 parts salt. The sea right now is at roughly 53,000 parts salt. So any water that we can use around the perimeter of the sea, that's a reject stream from a desalter, will be very helpful. The other reason we don't really want to use fresh water in the sea is because bringing fresh water into the sea actually activates the selenium that's bound in the sediments. Selenium is only an issue if we decrease the salinity of the sea below 15,000 parts. So we have a water supply issue. The O&M is another long-term issue as we go forward with projects. I don't want to belabor the point, but the state of California, in its infinite wisdom, proposed a few years ago an $8.9 billion project. And the O&M costs for maintaining such a project would be about $150 million a year. So when the residents around the sea came talking to me, I said, even if the state managed to deliver this project to you guys, you wouldn't be able to operate it for 1 hour. You don't have the funding sources to take care of this thing. So we started looking ahead at what to do. One of the critical points was environmental issues, and to that extent, we're working with the state to put in what they're calling the species conservation habitat. And basically, it's an area set aside so that fish-eating birds and some shallow wading birds can have habitat and maintain a minimal stopping point along the Pacific Flyway. This is a short-term gap type of project. The state has enough money to do O&M on this particular project for about 10 years. So they're waiting for us to come up with some money. We've also developed, with the assistance of the state, a financial assistance package program. And with that, what we've done is we have created a wetland project that will begin construction hopefully this year on the Torres Martinez Indian Tribe parcel. We're looking at potentially using geotubes as a technology to create berms. Right now, when we look at creating berms in the Salton Sea, because there is so much silt and the material in the bottom of the sea is so fine, we have to create berms that are massive, pretty much on the ratio of, for every foot in height, we have to come across 10 feet in width. So we're talking about placing large, well-engineered structures that are capable of sustaining its own loads as well as meeting earthquake requirements. Potentially by using little or large cannelloni type of geomembranes, we can fill that up with in situ material and possibly use that for berms, thereby decreasing the cost by about a factor of 90%. So that's the geotube habitat project. The Red Hill Bay project is something that is being done with IID on that financial assistance package. And what they're looking at doing is putting in a berm and maintaining a wetted area over those most highly emissive areas for ppm 10s, and that's at the southeast corner of the sea. That is a type of project that you're probably going to hear about later that's being done at Owens Lake. There's one means of controlling dust, and that is through keeping it wet. And again, we don't want to use fresh water for that. We're looking for brackish water. For the Red Hill Bay project, we're looking at using irrigation flows that can be combined with salt and seawater to maintain those areas. What happened, as I mentioned before, the state, when it came up with its $8.9 billion plan, was also supposed to come up with a feasibility plan for funding such a project, as well as the O&M. Recently, a year and a half ago, we were able to secure funding from the state to actually do what it should have done when it came up with its proposal. And that is to examine all the potential feasible projects that have been discussed going back for some 40-odd years. This includes looking at projects as bringing seawater in from Point Loma or the Gulf of California through pipelines or canals, tunnels, other conveyance facilities, as well as an outflow system going from the sea, the Salton Sea, out to the originating waters, either the Gulf or Pacific Ocean. Those were all, from an engineering perspective, viable projects. We have looked at many, many alternatives. When I came on board, I was told that there's nothing you can come up with that hasn't already been thought of. I took that as a challenge, but actually, they were right. because there was a public process and soliciting input from the public at large, as well as engineers and environmentalists, pretty much everything was taken care of. So right now we're looking at those projects, trying to figure out how to pare them down and possibly implement some form of restorative and mitigation activities down at the sea. One of the things that we are now doing is collecting information. When I took over the authority, I inherited 600 boxes of material stored in a storage shed that was not organized. So I've collaborated with the Water Research Institute. It's a department of the Cal State University system, and they have supplied interns, some of which are paid and some of which aren't. But nevertheless, they're doing the bulk of the work in sorting out those information out of the boxes. At the same time, I'm working with the Water Research Institute to develop a common database, a GIS database for those properties around the sea. And hopefully, all this will be publicly available information. I'm working with my member agencies to collect their data, conform it to a reasonably compatible standard. We're working with ESRI to assist us in this effort so that for any future planning activities around the sea, we will not have to go to each individual overlying entity to put together comprehensive projects that overlap or can deal with the sea holistically. Some of the other planning activities that we have is a Salton Sea Restoration and Renewable Energy Initiative. This is a program started by IID and Imperial County, who are not suing themselves so much right now and trying to work together to come up with a funding source for Salton Sea activities. In fact, at least verbally, they promised the Salton Sea Authority that should revenues be developed off of geothermal exploration or other types of mining activities, they would be willing to share that with the with the authority to pursue other activities going into the future. One important part is that no matter how hard we try locally, we will never be able to come up with billions of dollars. That's just it's an impossibility. So what we're looking at doing is working with other entities, potentially the Bureau of Reclamation, the Corps of Engineers, to look at long-term planning activities as well as doing some restorative work around the sea. And to do that, we're not going to get 100% grants, so we're going to have to come up with something local. And right now, the best shot for us is we're working with the Corps of Engineers and looking at getting a 65% cost share by the federal government with a 35% local share. What we are now doing is we are taking everything that has been done in the past and we are looking at current day regulations, activities, and technologies and seeing if somehow some portion or combinations of pieces of all the different solutions that have been proposed over the past 40 years can be put together and go ahead and actually build something to meet these goals.
Very good, Roger. I'd like to ask, could you clarify how did the Salton Sea get into the predicament that it's in? I recall from the past, it was agricultural runoff from Imperial, the freshwater runoff, that had a tendency to keep the salt balance, under control. And now with all the conservation of the return flows. So
yeah, well,
you see my point.
Yeah. I know you guys are interested in water supply. Historically, it took about 1.3 million acre feet per year to sustain that, the Salton Sea. It's a shallow eutrophic lake, has 360 square miles or so of surface area. So the evaporative losses being in the Imperial and Coachella valleys are rather high. As a result, the salinity has been increasing ever since it was formed by an accident. And for those of you that have a copy of the ripple effect, there's a good history in there of how the sea got formed. In terms of dealing with the salinity, it has been a continually increasing process over time. As you know, salt water comprised of pure water and other stuff, tends to concentrate those elements because we're evaporating pure water every year. So that 1.3 million acre feet of water in the future looks like it'll be about 700,000 acre feet of water that'll be evaporated every year. Still, that's a significant amount when you're looking at the discussions earlier today on the amount of water supply. But we have been dependent upon agricultural flows to maintain that. Some of those flows got transferred over during the QSA to the coast. And it's going to accelerate or exacerbate the maintenance of the sea beginning in 2017 when makeup water from IID will no longer be flowing directly into the sea. So it's an interesting issue, but what we are trying to do is we're trying to work with the increasing salinity. We're not trying to recreate the sea that it was back in the 60s. I used to go water skiing out there and catching 20-pound, 25-pound corbina. It was a beautiful place, but we'll never get back there. It's about 1.5 cubic miles of water, and it's unrealistic to think that we could treat that to a point where we can maintain the salinity for the entire body of water at 30,000 parts. I mean, the desal cost for something like that would be astronomical. So we're not looking at doing something like that. We're looking at just trying to work around the periphery, maintain habitat, create recreational advantages, and potentially encourage commercial development through real estate ventures on commercial as well as residential units around the sea.
Yeah. I had a dialogue with Roger prior to his presentation, and thanks for the clarification. We have no plans to use fresh water to address the water quality problem. So I guess that's sort of off the table. Or is it?
Yeah, well,
still in the mix.
No, we're not looking at fresh water at all. I think the only thing that might affect the Salton Sea from our perspective today is that if people go with ZLD, zero liquid discharge from the desalination units, then that takes away my last reasonable, I think, source of replenishment water for habitat and maintaining the periphery of the sea.
Very good. Well, I know. Just have one question. Roger, could you stay around?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Just quickly, Roger, you mentioned the feasibility study. When does that do come out? And the second part of that question was, will it lead into a program of VR, so it is public-private partnership aspects of the geothermal?
The feasibility study, or as we're now calling it, the feasibility action plan, will be completed in March of 2016. And as I described before, it's going to not come up with a solution. We don't plan to do the faux pas that the state of California did. We're not going to recommend a particular solution. What we're going to look at is all those steps that can be taken, as well as look at the availability of funds locally, potentially statewide, or through the water bond or from the federal government to accomplish those projects. But again, it has to be reality based. We're not going to sit around and pray for $9 billion to fall in our lap.
Well, thanks a lot.
Maybe with Roger's comments, we can view the Salton Sea issues as a small elephant in terms of addressing water issues in the coastal plain. We're going to hear about a much bigger elephant from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And I mean that in a very positive way. Our next speaker is an executive manager with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. He's got many decades of history at Los Angeles Water and Power, and he works primarily in the operations part of the organization. He's held numerous management positions in the replacement of their large water mains, which we are all aware of. It's presented on television, and he was assistant director of the water quality division at Los Angeles Water and Power, and most recently he's in charge of the I'm going to use the phrase Owens Valley issues, and I also asked him to also allude to the Mono Basin issues in terms of very general, in terms of water supply. And as we all know that Los Angeles is a member agency of the Metropolitan Water District, and to the extent that they lose water supplies from the Owens Valley and the Mono Lake, they have to get more water from MWD, which puts more competition on available water supplies. And I found it very interesting that you share common interests or issues with the Salton Sea about dust issues. And our speaker is a registered civil engineer. He has a BSMS from Long Beach State University and also an MBA from Pepperdine. So I'd like to introduce Milad. Taghavi. Pronounce that? Taghavi. Okay, very good. So please join us.
Good morning, everyone. Appreciate your excuse me, your invitations. We very much like to share with you all the good work that City of Los Angeles is doing, and this is a great opportunity to talk to this many group of folks. I was actually thinking that this presentation would be to a smaller, much smaller group, but I'm very pleased to see the participation in this meeting. And I also appreciate the title of the bigger elephant. At LADWP, we think to do things big, as history will show. Basically, what my presentation can be summarized in this first slide. That on your right side is what we have right now is shallow flooding, is fresh water, and we hope to go to the left, which would be using more of the Lake Playa through tilling and other methods to control dust. We always pay homage to Mr. Mulholland, but there's some interesting fact, and I apologize for the placement of my presentation that puts the first aqueduct in the line. But it's basically some of those issues could be related to our first aqueduct that was constructed in 1913 by Mr. Mulholland. It's about 338 miles. Is a magnificent engineering accomplishment. And unlike, for example, with the water coming from the north through pump system, this is all gravity flow coming in to Los Angeles. So it has a very, very little carbon footprint. As was discussed, I think we share the same map. I'm not sure who got it first, whether MWD or we got it, and we've been using the same map of the California with the water supply picture. So as you could see, we have the Los Angeles first, Owens, we call it Los Angeles Owens River, and then there's a first and second aqueduct. That's used to be our primary water source for the City of Los Angeles until around early 80s. We used to get roughly 70 to 80% of the city's total demand from the first and second aqueduct. City of Los Angeles, generally, its demand is about 650,000 acre feet of water, and we used to get upward of or up to 475,000 acre feet coming from the first and second aqueduct. And then the other source that we have locally is local groundwater, and with those two sources, we basically, potentially, at most, if I remember correctly, we relied on MET for maybe 5% or 10% of the city's supplies. Now that, of course, that picture has unfortunately changed. Some people say for better, some people say for worse. So right now, our reliance on MET, it has significantly increased. On dry years, we sometimes get about 75% of our total demand from Metropolitan. So as was discussed, whatever doesn't come down of the first and second aqueduct, it either has to come from the State Water Project or from the Colorado River system. And so because, the water is, there's no way of increasing the water, it's just where it comes from. It's the same pool of water. So which slice of the pie, or I don't know what the analogy would be for the water, but which portion of that would be coming in. So it's really important, as in terms of the water picture supply and for this entire state, whatever saving that can be achieved in terms of our activities for dust mitigations and environmental purposes in the Owens Valley. because then, of course, that will probably free up water for other folks in Orange County and San Diego as well. So this is just a little bit of a picture about Owens Lake. My talk was primarily about Owens Lake, but I will also toward the end I'll discuss a little bit about the Mono Basin and Mono Lake. Just to give you some understanding of Owens Lake. Owens Lake is in Inyo County. If you guys drive up to Bishop going skiing, you go through Inyo, and Owens Lake is just south of Lone Pine. So when you pass, you maybe within a few miles of Lone Pine, you just has passed Owens Lake, and I'm sure people will notice all of the water that has been placed on there. We roughly have about 36 square miles of fresh water on the lake coming from a Los Angeles aqueduct to control dust. But in terms of what does 110 square miles mean? So within the MODOC territory, it's basically if you put 14 of those cities on the first bulletin, it becomes the same size as Owens Lake. So Bono Park, Fountain Valley, Laguna Beach, La Habra, and all those good cities. Or you could put Irvine and Newport Beach together, and that would be the same size of Owens Lake. And some folks that are familiar with the Northern California, it's the same size of the Sacramento and Fresno. So within this same size, for example, Sacramento population and Fresno is between 470,000 to 500,000 people live within this area. So it's a huge, huge area. It's about 1/3 of the size of the Salton Sea, but again, we are the bigger elephant. So this is kind of shows you what we've been putting on the lake. We have started our dust mitigation in around 2000. So that was the start of the construction. So as you can see, 2001 is where the different phases has come online, and we started at about 7,000 acre-feet of water to where we are right now is over 80,000 acre-feet. And just to give some folks some other nice pictures, it will serve 826,000 folks, and is about the same water that we fill the Rose Bowl up to the top every single day. That's the amount of water that is put on Owens Lake during the 9 to 10 months of the dust mitigation season. So we filled Owens Lake, Rose Bowl, all the way to the top every single day. That requires about 258 acre-feet of water, or about 85 million gallons of water to fill the Rose Bowl. The issues are very complex, similar to Salton Sea. We have basically 22 stakeholders, which includes state, local, and federal, along with interested groups, NGOs, and the tribes. There are 5 tribes over there that are very much interested in our activities. And the big player for us over there is, of course, the Great Basin Unified Air Pollution Control District, which I understand they're consulting with the Air Pollution Control District for the Salton Sea. So some of the good experience that they have at Owens Lake would be passing on to the Salton Sea. And of course, the California Air Resources Board, California State Lands Commission, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, La Hunting, as well as EPA, BLM, and Forest Service. Similar to Salton Sea, this is a land's ownership map. 95% of the land is owned by the state of California. Unfortunately, 0 funds comes from the state of California to do this dust mitigation. So the city of Los Angeles has been responsible for all of the costs associated with dust mitigation. We are about $1.4 billion into dust as a result of this dust mitigation activities since about 2000. Anybody knows grants or funding, please let us know. We very much appreciate to tap into those venues as well. City of Los Angeles owns some lands, as you see, it's maybe around 1.5% to 2%. The other landowners are federal government, Bureau of Land Management, and Forest Service, but we all pay our homage to the state of California and State Lands Commission because they're the majority landowner, and majority of dust mitigations is being taking place on state lands properties. A little bit about the history of how we got in here. It's kind of put down in here some of the regulations that have been come in and establishment of certain agencies. And what you see in there highlighted in red is the in 1983 through legislation, Health and Safety Code 42316 came about. It's a small section. It's 385 words altogether according to word, when you do word count on it. And every one of those words, whether it's off, A, or whatnot, is about $4 million so far. This is a little bit of the history as well, and I will go a little bit more, talk about some of those issues a little bit more. But as you can see, Great Basin issued a state implementation plan back in 1997. In 1988, the city and Great Basin reached an understanding, and we signed a memorandum of understanding. As a result of that, a revised state implementation came in place, which highlighted 3 best available control measure, or BACM, for us to do dust control. And we are tied to those 3 measures that were developed back in 1998 to today. It's shallow flood. I show you some picture of that. Managed vegetation, basically using vegetation to control dust. And also, lastly, is using gravel to control dust. As the order of the magnitude, shallow floods uses a lot of water, roughly about 4 acre-foot of water per year. Managed vegetation is about 2, and gravel, of course, is 0. So we like to get into more of the gravel use. However, our landowner doesn't like that because it has very little habitat value. So there are challenges associated with that. So as you could see in here on the your left-hand side, we are right now at 45 square miles of the 110 square miles of the lake. So we will have dust control by July 1st of this year. Actually, in a few months, we will have 45 square miles controlled. So in about 2009. Our relationship got a little bit more tense with some of the parties out there, is because when we did some of those projects, and let me just go back to some of those things. We started at 16.5 square miles back in 1998. That was the order. If I recall correctly, the actual order was less than that. But the city said, we want to take care of it all at one time. Let's do one bigger project. Let's control bigger areas. So we will be done with it. Well, so we did 16.5. Then around 2003, there still was dust emissions from the lake, and the Great Basin says you need to do a little bit more. So City of Los Angeles says that, okay, as we do always things big, we say, okay, we'll do another great project, 13.3 square miles, to get it to 29 square miles of lake cover, and that should be it. Great Basin, I think, somewhat said it could be. And then we did another one back in 2006, another 12.7. So we got tired of do a little bit more, because it seems like we were not finishing. So that started a little bit more tense relationship with the Great Basin. Although if the Great Basin was in here, they would probably say the relation has been tense from the beginning. But back in 2011, the Great Basin issued us additional control orders, and they followed that with more orders in 2012. They reaffirmed those orders in 2013 and 2014. So the 2011 and 2012 will bring us to about 48.6 square miles of dust control on the lake. So I have a picture of him here on the side of the court, and CARB hearings and all those other good stuff that took place this past year. And this is where we are, and this would be our future, is that in November of last year, we reached an historic agreement with the Great Basin. Basically, what was discussed was that the city's obligation, now we have a limit on city's obligation for dust control on Owens Lake, which we haven't had since 2000. So what that is, we have agreed to do the 2011 and 2012 orders. So that will bring us up to the lake by December 2017 to 48.6 square miles of dust control. And then the district could only order us to do 4.8 more square miles. So the total area out of the 110 square miles that the city would be responsible for would be about 53.4 square miles. So now there's a finality in there. Other great achievements is that the picture that I showed you at the beginning using tillage to control dust, now that has also been agreed to for us to go and use more waterless and more efficient utilization of water on Owens Lake. Another big accomplishment in here is to look at new and improving existing dust controls. As I mentioned, we've been working on the 3 methods since 1998 that were developed. Those are the only approved methods that we have for controlling dust, and we're looking to develop some new ones. To help us in that process, we have now a scientific advisory panel. Out of the panel would be from National Academy of Science, and they will be tasked with looking at different issues on the lake to help us in that process. The other thing that the agreement allows for us to implement what I have in here, tillage with best available control method backup immediately on the lake. So we will be starting saving 8,600 acre-feet of water by basically converting about 4 square miles of the lake into less water-intensive dust controls. And the hope out of this is that we would be able to further reduce our 80,000 acre-feet of water that we're currently putting on the lake to maybe potentially half that amount. Again, makes it more water available to Orange County and San Diego, potentially. Another big thing that we started with the community and the stakeholders is the Owens Lake Master Project. The DWP and City of Los Angeles is committed to protecting the environment. That's not the point of contention. We're looking at better use of water by going to more waterless approaches, such as brine. We have on the lake, we have the brine pool portion of the Owens Lake. So there is opportunity to use that water. There are issues associated with that. There's Rio Tinto, one of our stakeholders, of course, mines the area for salt and other minerals. So we will be cutting into their business. So there has to be some other agreements reached. Using more gravel cover. Gravel cover, as I mentioned, the state lands does not like it because it has very little habitat value. Also, they're concerned about the color of the gravel and how things may look from folks driving up and down the 395. The other one is using groundwater. So there is one of the things actually the Air District will tell you, and we will tell you, is that having a high groundwater actually detrimental for dust control because they push the salt back up into the surface and then it gets emissive. So by lowering the groundwater should also reduce dust coming out of it. It's not quite intuitive, but that's what a lot of studies during these so many years have shown. The cost of doing the master project is about 600 million to about $1 billion. So I told you about the 3 dust control methods that we have. Shallow flood, it looks really nice. No fish there, but it's a lot of water to put on. And again, right now we have roughly about 36 square miles of shallow flood out there. So you have a picture kind of shows you that what it is when it's all filled, and one shows you when we are in the process of filling those ponds. Some of those ponds are almost 2 square miles. This is what we hope we could go to, is to implement farming methods. Tillage is an accepted, nationally and internationally in terms of controlling dust. Basically what it does, as you create these barriers for the wind, as it goes down, it reduces speed, and hence it will not allow for, there will be some sand movement, but it will not get airborne to the area that could be a health problem. That red implement, that bull plow that you see behind that Caterpillar D9 dozer, I tell folks it's about the same size, a little bit taller than me. So it really digs deep and pushes a lot of soil up in order to be able to have a high enough barriers to do that. When you take a look at the area photo, you don't get the actual size of it. It's really tough to walk through the area because it's we have created these big ridges and furrows and for dust control. This is what we have. We have about we will have about 4 square miles of gravel. So if you take a look at the mountains, that's where the 395 is. It looks really nice. We have used different shade of gravel. We've worked very hard to find the right shades to meet the state lands requirements. But it's very hard to tell from the 395 that it's gravel. It just looks like it's the playa itself. In here we have about 4-inch thick layer of gravel on top of a geofabric. This is the managed vegetation. This is how we grow it, the one on your right side. And when they age and they become a little bit taller, they turn brown. But it's not as green, but we have about 4 square miles of that to control dust. There's issues with controlling scaling within pipes and so forth, so we also have a small little water treatment facility for cleaning of the pipes as we provide irrigation for managed vegetation. And of course, we're restricted on what kind of a vegetation. It has to be local, so we're not introducing any new species. So these are saltgrass that some of them we basically grow in greenhouses and then come out and plant them. This is for time for question and answer, but I'll also talk about a little bit Mono Basin. I had these photos over here to show you Owens Lake is extremely challenging environment to work. So in 1 minute or a few feet, those excavators were on solid ground. The next thing you know, they are fallen because they've kind of gone through somewhat like a quicksand areas in there. And as you could see, some of our good workers, they were driving their ATV for maintenance, and suddenly the ground turned to something different than they were driving. So it's extremely difficult to do dust control on, most of those equipments are not DWPs, those are our contractors working out there. Some of our equipment were equipped with buoys on the side, so when they hit something soft, they won't sink in order to do that. But as was talked about before, with the droughts that we have had, and the temperatures, the water levels, as I understand, on Mono Lake has been dropping. So the city's agreement, going back in the early 90s, when the State Water Board issued their requirements for operating and exporting water from the Mono Basin, had certain elevations levels. And if I remember correctly, again, I apologize, it's not quite my area of responsibility currently, but if we drop below elevation of 66,388 feet, then our export out of the Mono Basin is reduced from 16,000 acre feet to 4,000 acre feet. And if it drops few more feet, then there is no export from Mono Basin because all the water needs to go into the Mono Lake. So this year, I think our forecast is that we will be able to export about 4,000 acre feet of water that we were able to do 16,000 just last year. So looking at that diagram, when we don't get enough water from the first and second aqueduct, then our reliance on the two other lakes of the Colorado River and the State Water Project increases. The City of Los Angeles is hoping through some of these activities that we're doing that we will be able to reduce the water that we put on the lake, as I mentioned, by half, so maybe between 32,000 acre feet of water versus 80,000. That if the agreement wasn't in place, there we potentially could have looked at up to 100,000 acre feet of water would have been needed for dust mitigation on Owens Lake for the additional areas. As I mentioned, 110, 53.4, so the remainder could become emissive and require controls. So we're very glad to have this historic agreement and at least understanding some finalities in terms of the city's responsibility and in terms of water management as well. More than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Let me just emphasize one point in Milad's presentation. Going back a few decades, they were able to bring in 475,000 acre feet of water into the city of Los Angeles. 475,000. How much are you bringing in now?
I think we're lucky if we get 200,000.
So they've lost. And I know you're trying to mitigate the loss to some extent. 275,000 acre feet. That's like 5 or 6 big desalters that we, capacity-wise, that we talked about on the coastal plain.
But last year you only got 34, though. 34,000.
Right. So as I said, we're very lucky to have 200,000. Absolutely right. We're much lower than that this past year, and we're having a hard time to find water in the aqueduct to put on Owens Lake. Right. And I was just looking at the handout that was out there just for the good folks. The water that we're putting on Owens Lake right now, will meet the total demand of City of Anaheim, Rancho Irvine Ranch, and Santa Ana, that 80,000 acre feet. So there's quite a few folks I'm sure would have enjoyed that water versus Beyond Lake. But we're committed to our environmental protection, and again, Owens Lake is also on the Pacific Path, and there are issues associated with that. No good deed goes as punished, as I say.
Very good. Well, it's been an outstanding presentation. As a closing comment, a new person to the waterfront is Dwayne Cave, as new director on Bolton Gale Water District Board, replacing Larry McKinney. So someone should have introduced him before, but he's corrected it now. So unless there's anything else to come before this group, we will adjourn.